That winter, as snow blanketed Helena, my wife and I were packing for the Thanksgiving gathering at my parents' sprawling mansion in Bozeman when my phone suddenly buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number carrying a stark warning. "Don't go home this year." I thought it was a prank, until I heard that Kaysen, my younger brother, had just been released from prison and was at our parents' house. That afternoon, I decided to drive back alone. As my tires rolled through the massive iron gates, the mansion loomed through the snowy haze, its golden lights casting an eerie, chilling glow. And just minutes later, I was stunned to realize the warning was no joke at all. "Hello, my name is Jonas Hale. I'm 34 years old, living in Helena, the capital of Montana, where snow-capped mountains stand silent like brooding giants. From the outside, my life might seem like a perfect picture. A cozy little house, a gentle wife named Natalie, and our little daughter Isla, the light of my life. But if you've ever stood in a field of pristine snow, you'd know. The smooth surface often hides deep cracks beneath. And my story, it begins with those cracks. I run a small construction company in Helena. It's not a grand enterprise, but it's enough to provide my family with a stable life. Every morning I wake up, brew coffee in our oak kitchen, listen to Natalie humming an old tune, and hear Isla chattering about the colorful drawings she's made. Those are the moments I cherish most, the ones that make me feel like my life has meaning. But sometimes, amidst Isla's laughter or Natalie's tender glances, I feel a void creeping into my chest. A small, cold hollow I've never dared to face head-on. I grew up in Bozeman, a few hours' drive from Helena, in a family people called the aristocracy of the North. The Hale name carried weight, respected but distant. My father, Charles Hale, was the founder of Hale Holdings, one of Montana's largest real estate conglomerates. He was the embodiment of power, a tall man with a voice like stone, always clad in black suits, never betraying emotion. My mother, Lorraine, was the epitome of elegance, hair perfectly pinned, dresses immaculate, but her eyes were as cold as the stone walls of our Bridger Ridge mansion. Together they were a formidable pair, running everything like a machine. The company, the family, even their own children. The Bridger Ridge mansion where I grew up was a magnificent structure. Gray stone walls, towering glass windows, and impeccably manicured gardens. But step inside and you'd feel the chill. Not the cold of Montana's air, but the cold of a home devoid of warmth. Everything had to be perfect, from the way my younger brother Kaysen and I dressed and spoke to the way we smiled for distinguished guests. "Reputation is everything," my father used to say, and my mother would nod as if it were the only truth that mattered. Kaysen, my brother, 5 years my junior, was a tempest. If I was the obedient son, always striving to please our parents, Kaysen was a blazing fire, refusing to be tamed. He was impulsive, defiant, and always looking to break the rules our parents imposed. I remember our childhood days when I sat at the desk with stacks of books while Kaysen sneaked out to climb the hills behind the house or rode off on a stolen bicycle. "Jonas, you're always like a robot," he'd laugh, his eyes twinkling with mischief. But I knew deep down he carried a pain. The pain of a child raised in a home where love was replaced by expectations. Our parents were rarely home. They were consumed by meetings, lavish parties, and plans to expand their empire. Kaysen and I fended for ourselves, each in our own way. I chose compliance, striving to be the model son they wanted, attending prestigious schools, graduating with honors, and entering the world of business. Kaysen rebelled. He dropped out of school, got tangled in risky investments and shady deals, and eventually sank into debt. "Jonas, you need to set an example for your brother," my father would say, his voice heavy with command. I nodded, but every time I looked into Kaysen's eyes, I saw him drifting further away like a ship without an anchor. The rift between us grew over the years. Kaysen always felt compared, labeled the wayward son next to the perfect heir that I was. Once during a rare family dinner, he slammed the table and snarled, "He's just your puppet, but I'm the future of the Hale family." My mother merely sipped her wine, while my father fixed him with an icy stare. "No, Kaysen, you're just a disappointment." Then when I was 29, everything fell apart. Kaysen was arrested for financial fraud, embezzling funds from the company he worked for. The scandal shook Bozeman. The press branded him the Hale family traitor, and my parents saw it as an indelible stain. "This house no longer has a son like that," my father declared, his voice unwavering. I hired the best lawyer I could, trying to help Kaysen, but he refused to see me. In our last call through the prison's glass partition, he only said, "Go home, Jonas. Don't waste your time." Then he cut off all contact. After that, I left Bozeman. I couldn't bear the suffocating atmosphere of Bridger Ridge, the judgmental stares of the elite, or the memories of a family that was never truly a family. I moved to Helena, met Natalie, and built a new life. Natalie was a light in my darkness. She always knew how to make me laugh and never pried too much into my past. Isla's birth brought a joy I never thought I deserved. I tried to bury everything tied to the Hale family, but sometimes on long nights when snow fell outside the window, I still dreamed of that mansion, silent, cold, like a sleeping beast. The only person in that house who ever brought me warmth was Agnes Porter, our family's housekeeper. She cared for Kaysen and me since we were children, wiping my tears when our parents were absent, telling Kaysen bedtime stories when he feared the dark. She had a way of making things lighter, whether with a hug or a plate of warm cookies. "Sometimes people aren't cruel. They're just too busy to love," she once said when I was 15. Sitting in the kitchen with red eyes after my father scolded me for not being good enough. Her words haunt me to this day. Now as I sit in our small kitchen in Helena watching Natalie prepare breakfast and Isla scribble a colorful drawing, I wonder if I've truly escaped the past. Snow falls again outside, blanketing the roads leading back to Bozeman. Deep down, I know a part of me is still trapped at Bridger Ridge, where it all began, and where I fear it might all end. Today is an ordinary day, but something in the air feels unsettling. Maybe it's because Thanksgiving is approaching, and as always, my parents will call, insisting I return to Bozeman, to that mansion, for the family dinner. Natalie is always excited for these trips, believing family is the most important thing. But every time I think about stepping through the iron gates of Bridger Ridge, my chest tightens. I haven't told her, but each step toward that house is a step back into the past, into memories I want to forget. I stand holding my now cold coffee, staring out the window. The snow falls heavier, as if trying to hide something. Natalie wraps her arms around my waist, whispering, "You okay?" I smile, nod, but inside I know I'm not. A storm is coming, not just out there, but within me. And I'm afraid that when it hits, this perfect picture will shatter. The morning of Thanksgiving in Helena began with its familiar bustle. Snow blanketed the streets, rooftops, and our small front yard. Natalie was busy in the kitchen, carefully tying red ribbons around gift boxes and arranging fragrant trays of cookies into baskets. Isla, our little daughter, sat on the floor drawing a picture of sparkling snowflakes, humming a Christmas carol. She looked up at me, beaming with a radiant smile. "I finished my drawing, Daddy, look." I bent down, praising her artwork, but my mind had drifted elsewhere, to a place I didn't want to remember. Bridger Ridge. The trip to Bozeman today was unavoidable. My parents, as they did every year, had called weeks earlier, my father's voice over the phone as cold as stone. "Jonas, the whole family needs to be there. It's tradition." I didn't argue. I never did. But the thought of stepping through the iron gates of that mansion made my chest tighten, as if someone were squeezing the breath out of me. As we prepared to load the car, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Don't go home today. It's dangerous." Just a few words, chillingly brief. I froze, my fingers hovering over the screen, trying to make sense of it. Who sent it? Why? A prank? A wrong number? I shook my head, telling myself it was a silly mistake, and slipped the phone into my pocket. But those words, like a small knife, cut into my mind, leaving a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. We got into the car, Natalie beside me checking the gift list while Isla in the back clutched her snowflake drawing and chattered about reindeer. I turned on the radio to drown out my restless thoughts, but the signal was spotty, broadcasting only snippets of a warning about a light snowstorm approaching Bridger Ridge. The snow fell heavier outside, the sky a heavy gray blanket pressing down. That warning message lingered in my mind despite my efforts to dismiss it. Just a prank, I told myself, but my hands gripped the steering wheel cold despite the car's heater. I pulled out my phone and tried calling the number back. No answer, just endless beeps. I tried again, then again, but still nothing. The signal was patchy, probably from the snow or because we were deep in the winding mountain roads. Natalie noticed my unease. She placed a hand on my arm gently. "What are you thinking about? You look so tense." I forced a smile, trying to seem normal. "I'm fine. It's nothing." But deep down, I was afraid. That message carried a weight, a shadow I couldn't shake. Halfway to Bozeman, I tried calling again. This time, someone picked up. A frail, trembling voice came through. It was Agnes, our family's housekeeper, the nanny who raised us in my parents' home. Her voice, once warm and steady in my childhood memories, now sounded thin and broken like a cracked bell. "Jonas, don't come to the house today. Your brother, Kaysen, he's out of prison. He's here." My heart stopped. Kaysen, my brother, out of prison, at Bridger Ridge. Agnes's words came in fragments, the signal cutting in and out. "The house, it's tense. Charles is trying to act normal. Lorraine's avoiding everyone. Kaysen, he's different, cold. I have a bad feeling, Jonas. Don't come." The signal dropped, the call ending in silence I couldn't comprehend. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. Kaysen was out of prison. Today, at the house I was driving to. The air in the car grew thick, freezing, as if the snow outside had seeped into my bones. Natalie looked at me, her eyes wide with worry. "Who were you talking to? What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. My mouth was dry, my mind a whirlwind. Kaysen, my brother who had turned his back on me, on all of us, was back. And Agnes, the steady, unflappable woman, was afraid. That alone was enough to make my blood run cold. I pulled the car to the side of the road, tires crunching on fresh snow. "I need to take you and Isla to your parents' place in Big Sky," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "I'll go to Bridger Ridge alone." Natalie's face paled. "Jonas, what's happening? You're scaring me." Isla looked up from her drawing in the back, her small face etched with confusion. I forced a smile, fragile as breaking glass. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just a change of plans." But it wasn't okay. Kaysen was there. Something was wrong, and I was driving straight into that uncertainty. I turned the car toward Big Sky, the road blurring under thick snow. Natalie didn't ask more, but her silence was heavy, her hand resting on mine as if to hold me back. I dropped them off at her parents' house, promising to explain later. Natalie hugged me tightly before I left. "Be careful, love," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I drove to Bozeman alone, the world narrowing to the beam of my headlights cutting through the snow. The air in the car was cold, despite the heater. The closer I got to Bridger Ridge, the tighter the knot in my chest grew. The radio blared another snowstorm warning, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside me. Agnes's voice, her fear, echoed in my ears louder than the howling wind outside. The road wound through the mountains, each mile marker like a countdown. Bridger Ridge loomed in my mind, its stone walls and towering windows as imposing as ever. I could see it, feel it, the weight of that house pulling me back. Not just to a place, but to a past I'd tried to bury. Kaysen's face flashed through my memory. His reckless smile, his defiant eyes, the boy he was before everything shattered. Who was he now? What had prison turned him into? And why was Agnes, the woman who raised us both, so afraid? Finally, the iron gates of Bridger Ridge emerged through the snowy haze. They stood imposing and cold, like a portal to another world. I stopped the car, turned off the engine, but didn't rush to get out. My hands clung tightly to the steering wheel as if letting go would plunge me into some abyss. Through the windshield, I saw the mansion, its golden lights spilling from the windows, flickering like the breath of a sleeping beast. The wind howled through the pines, carrying a bone-chilling cold. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but memories flooded in, vivid and unstoppable. I remembered our childhood days when Cassin and I were just carefree boys chasing each other across the hills behind the house. We built snow castles, sprawled on the summer grass, watching clouds drift by and dreaming of adventures. Cassin was always the leader, with his radiant smile and wild ideas. "Jonas, one day we'll get out of here," he'd said, his eyes sparkling. "Just you and me, no one else." I'd laughed, nodded, but deep down I knew I'd never dare. I was the eldest, taught to obey, to set an example, to uphold the Hale family name. But Cassin was different. The older he got, the further he drifted from the mold our parents set. While I buried myself in studies, striving to please our father, Cassin started hanging out with what our father called low-life delinquents. He was reckless, stirring up trouble, and every time our father scolded him, he'd just smirk, his eyes blazing with defiance. "He doesn't understand me," he told me one late night in the dim kitchen. "Dad just wants me to be another version of you." I wanted to say something, to tell him I wasn't his enemy, but I stayed silent. I was always silent. Things took a darker turn when Cassin was 19. He got entangled in a massive debt with some shady figures in Bozeman. I still remember the night they showed up at Bridger Ridge, men in leather jackets, their voices growling, standing at the gate demanding payment. Our father, with his stone-like resolve, confronted them. "The Hales don't pay debts for fools," he said, his voice icy. They sneered, tossing back a warning before leaving. "You'll regret this." Cassin wasn't home that night. He'd fled, leaving me and our parents to deal with the fallout. I saw our father standing in his study, fists clenched, his eyes burning with rage. "That boy is a disgrace," he said, and for the first time I saw our mother cry, though she quickly wiped the tears away as if emotions were forbidden. The breaking point came when I was 29, and Cassin had just turned 24. He was arrested for financial fraud, embezzling funds from the company he worked for. The scandal rocked Bozeman. The press ran headlines calling him the wayward son of the Hale family. Our parents, with their characteristic coldness, disowned him, as if Cassin had never been part of our family. I did everything I could, hiring the best lawyer to try to reduce his sentence, but Cassin rejected my help. The last time we met through the thick glass of the prison, he looked at me with dull, empty eyes and whispered, "Go home, Jonas. Don't bother." Then he turned away, walking off down the cold hallway, his figure shrinking into the distance. In that moment, it felt like he took the last piece of our shared memories with him, leaving me standing in the dark, unsure of what I had lost. I snapped my eyes open, my breath ragged, pulling me back to reality. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in a silent white shroud. The mansion before me looked like a painting, but one from a bad dream. I took a deep breath, preparing to open the car door, when suddenly a black SUV roared out of the mansion's grounds through the gate. It sped past my car with a screech, vanishing into the snowy haze. My heart pounded, blood rushing to my head. That vehicle. It didn't belong to anyone in the family. Not my father's, not my mother's, and certainly not Agnes's. I sat frozen, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. A vague dread rose within me, as cold as the wind outside. Who had just left the house? Cassin? Or someone else? And why were they driving so fast, as if fleeing from something? I stared at the open gate, a sense of unease settling in. Something was wrong. I could feel it, my instincts like a wild animal sensing danger closing in. I wanted to turn the car around to leave this place, but I knew I couldn't. Agnes had warned me, and now I stood at the threshold of my past. The wind howled through the pines, carrying the sharp, cold scent of snow, and something else, metallic, pungent, and familiar enough to make my heart seize. I pressed the gas pedal and the car glided through the wide-open iron gates of Bridger Ridge, the headlights sweeping across the grounds, illuminating rows of pine trees standing still like ghostly shadows. The air was eerily silent. I looked around, calling out loudly, "John? Carter?" the family's 2 security guards. No one answered. Only the howling wind, like a haunting melody, echoed through the white snow. I parked in front of the steps leading to the main entrance and turned off the engine. Silence enveloped everything, broken only by the pounding of my heart in my chest. I stepped out of the car, my legs heavy as lead. Each step felt like a battle against myself, against the fear clawing at my mind. The closer I got, the more I sensed that pungent smell. It was no longer just a feeling. It was real, permeating the air, seeping into every breath. I climbed the steps and then I saw them. The 2 guards, John and Carter, lay slumped by the entrance, their blood staining the icy stone tiles. Their guns lay scattered as if they hadn't had time to use them. John's eyes stared blankly into the void while Carter lay face down, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. I staggered back, my breath ragged, my trembling hand brushing against the door. "Dad, Mom, Agnes," I whispered, as if calling their names could make everything normal again. But I knew nothing was normal here anymore. I pushed open the heavy wooden front door, which creaked ominously. Inside, the main hall was dark, lit only by a faint glow from the dining room, weak like a candle on the verge of flickering out. I stepped inside, and the scene before me left me frozen. The long dining table, where my family once sat through cold, formal dinners, was now a chaotic mess. Shattered wine glasses littered the floor, red wine mingling with blood in horrifying streaks. The pristine white tablecloth was stained crimson, pulled askew as if someone had struggled desperately. Chairs were toppled, one broken in half, as if bearing witness to a massacre. I moved forward, my legs trembling, and then I saw him. My father, Charles Hale, the man who had been a symbol of power, lay slumped near the head of the table, blood seeping from his chest, soaking his black suit. His eyes were wide open but lifeless, a hollow void where light once was. Nearby, my mother, Lorraine, was slumped in a chair, her hand still resting on a blood-soaked napkin. Her face, always poised and controlled, was now contorted in the agony of her final moments. I wanted to scream, to run to them, but my body felt frozen, my heart pounding as if it might burst from my chest. I turned, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of life. Near the kitchen door, 2 maids lay motionless. One, Mary, still clutched her phone, her fingers rigid on the screen, as if she had tried to call for help but ran out of time. The other, Clara, lay face down, her hair splayed over her face, blood pooling on the wooden floor. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat, my mind reeling. The smell of blood, the acrid tang of something burnt, and the cold of the house gripped me as if trying to swallow me whole. Then I heard it, a faint sound like a weak moan coming from the staircase. A small light from the hallway flickered, struggling to hold on to its glow amidst the darkness. I moved toward it, each step heavy as if walking through a nightmare. At the base of the stairs, I saw her. Agnes, the housekeeper who had raised me, the only person who ever brought warmth to this house, lay gasping, blood soaking her sleeve. She was barely breathing, her eyes wide with panic but filled with determination, as if trying to say something. I knelt beside her, grasping her hand, which was cold as ice. "Agnes, are you okay? What happened?" My voice trembled, nearly breaking. She tried to move her lips, but only faint, disjointed sounds came out. Her eyes, despite the pain, held a desperate urgency as if warning me. I looked down and my heart stopped. On the floor, bloody footprints stretched from where she lay, leading toward the back door. A wave of numbness spread through my body. I pulled back, my hands stained with Agnes's blood, my mind spinning amidst the smells of blood and char. The black SUV, the footprints, the blood. They were pieces of a horrifying puzzle, but I couldn't make sense of them. Kaysen? Could he have done this? Or was it someone else? A shadow from a past my father had provoked. I stood, my legs trembling, my eyes fixed on the back door where the footprints vanished into the darkness. The mansion, once a symbol of power and prestige, was now nothing but a cold, blood-soaked tomb. I wanted to run, to escape this place, but I knew I couldn't leave Agnes. I couldn't abandon the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped it, my fingers slick with blood. I dialed 911, my voice choked, each word feeling like it was being torn from my throat. "There's a murder," I whispered, struggling to keep my voice clear for the dispatcher. "At Bridger Ridge. Please, come quickly." I don't remember what else I said, only that when I hung up I knelt beside Agnes, trying to stem the bleeding from her shoulder. Blood soaked through her sleeve, hot and sticky, seeping through my fingers. "Hold on, Agnes," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Help is coming." But her eyes, though frantic, seemed to drift somewhere far away, beyond me, beyond this house. I don't know how long I knelt there, only that the blare of police and ambulance sirens suddenly pierced the silent snow. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the white snow, staining the grounds in chaotic colors as if the nightmare itself were erupting into flames. Police swarmed in, their footsteps urgent, their voices sharp and rapid. An officer pulled me away from Agnes, practically dragging me to my feet. "You need to step outside," he said, his tone firm but not without empathy. They draped a blanket over my shoulders, but the cold inside me wasn't something a blanket could chase away. I stood in the yard, my eyes vacant, staring at the mansion where golden light still spilled from the windows as if nothing had happened. Paramedics rushed in with stretchers. I heard them shouting, calling to each other, but it all felt like it was coming from another world. Agnes was placed on a stretcher, her face deathly pale, her breathing shallow. "Critical condition," a paramedic said, voice urgent. "We need to get her to the hospital now." I wanted to run after her, to hold her hand again, but my feet felt nailed to the ground. The police cordoned off the scene, yellow tape stretching across the gate and steps where the blood of the two guards still pooled, now beginning to freeze under a thin layer of snow. A middle-aged officer with a stern face asked me to recount everything. I sat on a bench in the yard, the blanket slipping off my shoulders, and began to speak, my voice disjointed like someone describing a dream. I told him about the strange text, its brief but chilling words. "Don't go home today. Dangerous." I told him about Agnes's call, her trembling voice through the spotty signal, warning me about Kaysen, about the tense atmosphere in the house. And I told him about the black SUV speeding through the gate and vanishing into the snow like a phantom. The officer took notes, his eyes sharp, missing no detail. But I felt his gaze, as if he were assessing me, as if I were part of this horrific puzzle. Forensic teams arrived, bringing with them the smell of chemicals and the detached professionalism of those accustomed to death. They examined the scene with careful steps, their voices hushed, as if reluctant to disturb the lingering spirits. One turned to the officer and said, 6 victims. All deceased except the older woman. She's been taken to emergency care. 6 victims. My father, Charles Hale, the man who never bowed. My mother, Lorraine, with her always perfect facade. The 2 guards, John and Carter, faces I'd known since childhood, and the 2 maids, Mary and Clara, innocent people caught in this storm. I wanted to scream, to demand why, but my mouth was dry, managing only a faint moan. The police began searching the scene, and what they found made my heart stop. A younger officer with short hair and piercing eyes approached, holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a handgun glinting under the flashlight and a metal bracelet, the gift I'd given Kaysen for his 18th birthday. I remembered that day how he'd laughed, slipped it onto his wrist and said, "You sure know how to pick a gift, Jonas." Now that bracelet sat in the plastic bag, smeared with blood like an accusation. "This gun," the young officer said, his voice even but sharp, "has a serial number registered to Kaysen Hale. We'll verify it in the system. Do you know anything about this? I froze as if someone had punched me in the chest. Kaysen. His name hit like a blade. No, I whispered, my voice trembling. It can't be. Kaysen, he couldn't have done this. But my words were weak, as if I were trying to convince myself more than anyone else. The officer looked at me, silent, but his eyes said it all. He didn't believe me. Outside, the snow kept falling, slowly covering the tire tracks of the black SUV. The traces were nearly gone now, as if they'd never existed. My mind was a whirlwind. Kaysen, the bracelet, the gun, the bloody footprints. Everything pointed to him, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't bear to believe it. I thought of Kaysen, the little brother who once ran after me on the hills, laughing so loudly it echoed through the garden. He'd fallen, made mistakes, but murder? Killing our family? I shook my head, hot tears rolling down my cheeks, freezing in the cold air. It's not him, I whispered, but my voice was lost, carried away by the wind. Every piece of evidence screamed otherwise, and the last shred of faith I had, that Kaysen, despite his flaws, was still my brother, was dissolving under the snow. I stumbled out of the mansion's yard, my legs heavy as lead, and climbed into the car. The police were still cordoning off the scene, their red and blue lights flashing like soulless eyes. I drove straight to Bozeman Memorial Hospital, my mind blank, driven only by the need to be with Agnes. She was the last one left, the final keeper of my family's shattered memories. The road to the hospital was shrouded in snow, but I didn't care. My head was empty, filled only with the image of Agnes lying there, blood soaking her sleeve, her frantic eyes trying to tell me something. The hospital loomed through the snow, its cold white light spilling from the main entrance like a reluctant invitation. I walked in, my clothes still stained with Agnes's blood, my hands trembling as I asked a nurse about her condition. She's in surgery, a young nurse said, her voice gentle but unable to mask the gravity. She's in critical condition. Her chances aren't high. Her words hit like a knife, slicing into my chest. I nodded, unable to speak, and sank into a cold plastic chair in the hallway. My eyes were sunken, my mind reeling with the horrific images from Bridger Ridge. I sat there hour after hour, watching the clock on the wall tick, each second stretching into a century. Near dawn, the operating room doors opened. A doctor, his face weary but composed, approached. She's made it through the worst, he said, his voice steady but carrying a glimmer of hope. But she needs intensive monitoring. She's very weak. I bowed my head, tears silently falling to the floor. I didn't know if I was crying from relief or from the pain still crushing my heart. Thank you, I whispered, my voice choked. The doctor nodded and walked away, leaving me with the heavy silence of the hospital corridor. I stayed at Bozeman Memorial Hospital all that day, where Agnes fought for her life minute by minute. That afternoon, as the sunlight faded over the mountains outside the window, my phone buzzed. It was Natalie. Her voice came through, gentle but laced with worry, as if she sensed the darkness clinging to me without knowing what had happened. "Jonas, are you okay? What's going on in Bozeman?" she asked, her voice trembling, holding back her unease. I gripped the phone tightly and forced a smile, though she couldn't see it. "Everything's fine, love," I said, trying to sound calm. "Just some minor issues. I need to stay a few days." I knew I was lying, but I couldn't let Natalie and Isla be dragged into this nightmare. I didn't want her to know that Kaysen, my brother whom she'd met in distant, happier days, had become a murderer, that my entire family had been wiped out in one blood-soaked night. I wanted to protect her, if only for a few days, until I could muster the strength to face the truth and tell her everything. In the days that followed, I took turns with the nurses caring for Agnes. Sitting by her bedside, I wiped sweat from her forehead, held her frail hand whenever she moaned in her sleep. The cold light from the window cast shadows on her face, etched with the years she'd endured. The woman who raised Kaysen and me, who wiped our tears when our parents were too busy with fame and power. Now she was the only one left, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her again. 3 days later, Agnes woke. I was sitting by her bed, my eyes red from sleepless nights, when she stirred. Her eyes opened, weak but sharp, as if her will to survive was stronger than death itself. "Jonas," she whispered, her voice thin as the wind. I clutched her hand, tears welling up again. "You're okay, Agnes. You're safe now." But her eyes told a different story, a deep, unspoken pain, not just from the wound in her shoulder. The door swung open. 2 police officers entered, bringing with them the cold scent of the hospital corridor. One in plain clothes held a notebook. The other had a gold badge glinting in his pocket. "We need to take a statement from Ms. Agnes Wells," the officer said softly, his tone polite but firm. I stood, stepping aside, my heart pounding. Her voice was halting, frail as a flickering candle as she recounted the night. Kaysen had returned to Bridger Ridge carrying a bottle of wine and a large envelope. The dinner began in silence, the air heavy as before a storm. My father, Charles, sat at the head of the table trying to act normal, but his eyes were cold, distant. My mother, Lorraine, barely looked at Kaysen, sipping her wine and avoiding his gaze. Kaysen was silent through most of it, but his eyes, Agnes said, were cold as ice, not the boy he used to be. Then Kaysen spoke. He said that while in prison, the lawyer Harold Pritchard had sent him a copy of a new will, per Charles's direct request. That disinherited him from the family estate. "Why?" he asked, his voice trembling with anger and pain. My father responded, cold as stone. "Because you chose your own path." The air in the room grew suffocating, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. Agnes stood near the kitchen door, sensing the tension but powerless to act. Then my father delivered the final blow like a slashing blade. "It's done," Kaysen snapped. He smashed a wine glass, shards scattering across the table. Agnes heard gunfire, sharp and deafening. Lorraine lunged forward, trying to intervene, but collapsed instantly, blood staining her white dress. Agnes was shot in the shoulder, falling in the chaos, and passed out before she could see what happened next. When she came to, Kaysen was gone. She stopped, her breathing fading. The officer scribbled quickly, saying nothing, glancing at me briefly, a look heavy as stone. Her words were another knife, slicing deep into my heart. I sat there, holding her hand, my mind reeling. Kaysen, my brother, the boy who once shared childhood dreams with me, now a murderer? I didn't want to believe it, but Agnes's account matched the scene. The shattered glass, the blood, and the metal bracelet I'd given him, now blood-stained in the police's evidence bag. The police moved swiftly. A statewide manhunt was issued, Kaysen Hale's name appearing on every news channel, accompanied by warnings of armed and dangerous. I sat in the hospital waiting room, watching his face on the screen, gaunt and hollow-eyed. The press dubbed him the disowned heir, turning our family tragedy into a sensational story. I turned off the TV, unable to bear it, but the image was seared into my mind. Night fell and I left the hospital, driving aimlessly through Bozeman. I passed the old streets, places tied to my and Kaysen's childhood. The park where we used to play, the cafe where he'd skip school to meet friends, the small river where we'd skip stones, counting which went farthest. Each place was a piece of memory, but now they only brought pain. I was torn between 2 emotions, wanting Kaysen caught for justice to be served, and dreading that when he was, I'd lose the last family I had. Near dawn, I stopped by the river, now frozen and dusted with thin snow. I stepped out, letting the cold bite into my skin, watching the snow fall silently. If I hadn't left that day, I asked myself, my voice lost in the wind, would things have been different? If I had stayed, tried to pull Kaysen from the darkness, would he have become this? Would my family have shattered like it has now? The snow fell, burying every answer, leaving me with emptiness and questions that would never be resolved. A week after the massacre, I stood before the ancient St. Augustine Church, where my parents' funeral was held. Bozeman was bitterly cold, snow falling heavily, blanketing rooftops and the road leading to the church. The wind howled through the pines, carrying a bone-chilling cold, as if nature itself were mourning the Hale family tragedy. But inside me there was no lament, only a numbing void, as if all my emotions had been drained in that horrific night. The church was packed. The Hale extended family, faces I'd only seen a handful of times in my life, sat in the front pews, heads bowed in feigned solemnity. Business partners, Hale Holdings shareholders, and acquaintances of my parents were there. Not to grieve, but to maintain appearances, to prove they still belonged to the glamorous world my family once represented. The media lurked outside, their cameras like vultures ready to capture any moment that could sell. Natalie and Isla had arrived in Bozeman that morning despite my attempts to convince them to stay in Big Sky. Natalie insisted she wanted to be by my side. That family should face this pain together. Isla, my 7-year-old daughter, clung tightly to her mother's hand, her wide eyes scanning the heavy atmosphere with confusion. "Daddy, where did Grandma and Grandpa go?" she asked, her small voice so innocent it pierced my heart. I couldn't answer, only patted her head and turned away, afraid my eyes would betray a truth she wasn't ready to understand. I stood alone before 2 coffins draped in white flowers placed at the center of the church. My father, Charles Hale, the man who had been a symbol of power, lay there, motionless, his face frozen in final severity. My mother, Lorraine, whose elegance never faded, was now just a silent shadow. I looked at them, searching for a trace of warmth, a memory of when we were a family, but all I found was coldness. No one in the church wept, not a sob, not a tear. The funeral was grand, steeped in ritual, but cold and distant. Natalie stepped beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice full of worry. I nodded slightly, but didn't look at her. I couldn't. If I met Natalie's eyes, I feared I'd collapse, letting everything I was holding back spill out. I just stood there, eyes fixed on the coffins, feeling like I was standing before an abyss. Camera flashes from the press went off relentlessly, blinding and invasive. They photographed me, the last surviving heir of Hale Holdings, as they called me. Each click of the shutter was like a knife, cutting into the privacy I was trying to protect. Natalie quickly pulled Isla away, shielding her from the prying eyes and greedy lenses. "Don't look, sweetheart," she murmured, holding Isla close. I wanted to thank her, to say how grateful I was for her protecting our daughter, but my throat was tight, unable to form words. After the ceremony, I took Natalie and Isla to the hotel. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the road, blurring their figures as they entered the building. "I'll take Isla back to Helena tomorrow morning," Natalie said, her voice resolute but her eyes filled with worry. "You need time, Jonas, but don't lose yourself." I nodded, hugging her and Isla one last time before turning away. As their silhouettes faded into the snowy haze, an overwhelming emptiness enveloped me, as if I'd left a piece of myself behind. I returned to meet Harold Pritchard, the family lawyer who had contacted me earlier, in his small but elegant office in downtown Bozeman. He sat behind his desk, his silver hair and sharp eyes those of a man accustomed to moments that change destinies. "Jonas," he said, his voice low, "we need to discuss the will." He produced a sealed envelope, its red wax stamp stark against the white paper. I sat down, hands clenched, feeling like I was preparing to face a verdict. He opened the envelope and read aloud my parents' final will. The entire estate, the Bridger Ridge mansion, shares in Hale Holdings, bank accounts, everything, was transferred to me, Jonas Hale, on the condition that I maintain the company for at least 5 years. Kayson's name was completely omitted, as if he had never existed. I sat frozen, the paper in Pritchard's hand trembling as I took it, as if it weighed more than the 2 coffins in the church. "This will was signed just a week before Thanksgiving," Pritchard said, his voice even, "when Kayson was still in prison." His words hit like a blow. A week before Thanksgiving, while Kayson was still behind bars, my parents had chosen to erase him, severing their final tie to him. I thought of Agnes's account, of Kayson seeing the copy of the will, of his rage that horrific night. Could this will, the final rejection from our parents, have pushed him to the edge. I looked out the window where snow fell thicker, blanketing the world. It all felt like a cruel irony. My parents left me everything: wealth, power, reputation, but no peace. 3 weeks after the massacre, I lived like a shadow. Each day I returned to the hospital, sitting by Agnes's side, holding her hand, hoping her recovery would fill the void tearing at my heart. But nothing could erase the image of the Bridger Ridge mansion where blood and memories merged into an unending nightmare. I avoided newspapers, avoided the news, but the story of the Hale family spread everywhere like an oil spill that couldn't be contained. Then one frigid afternoon, as I sat in the hospital waiting room, my phone buzzed. A police officer called, his voice dry but urgent. "We found the black SUV in a forest near the Idaho border." My heart pounded as if it had been yanked from my chest. The black SUV, the one that had sped past me that horrific night, had been abandoned, a trace of the crime. They found fingerprints inside, blood samples matching the scene, and something that left me frozen. An old photo of Kaysen and me as children, standing on the Bridger Ridge Hill, smiling brightly under the summer sun. That photo, once a keepsake of carefree days, now lay in an evidence bag, smeared with dust and blood. That evening, Kaysen was arrested. They found him at a gas station 40 miles from the forest, exhausted, clothes tattered, no weapon on him. The news spread like wildfire, dominating every television channel. I sat in my hotel room watching Kaysen's image on the screen, handcuffed, escorted through a crowd of reporters. His eyes weren't filled with the hatred I'd expected. They were empty, hollow, like those of a man who had lost everything. I choked, unable to breathe, as if I were the one in cuffs being dragged into the darkness. The trial took place 2 months later, drawing media attention across Montana. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with curiosity and judgment. I sat in the back row, trying to shrink away from the prying eyes of the press. Agnes, partially recovered, was brought in as a witness. She entered, her steps frail but her eyes resolute. Her testimony, word by word, matched the scene. The shattered wine glass, the gunfire, and the image of Kaysen with cold eyes drawing a gun in a fit of rage. Each word from Agnes was like a knife, cutting into the fragile hope that Kaysen was innocent. Kaysen sat in the defendant's chair, gaunt and haggard, his hair disheveled, his eyes sunken. He didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. Throughout the trial, he remained silent like a stone statue, speaking only once when questioned. "I lost everything a long time ago." His voice was calm but carried a pain I couldn't reach. The courtroom fell silent, the only sound the scratch of the judge's pen signing the verdict. "Life in prison, no parole for first-degree murder." That pen stroke rang out, sharp as the gunfire from that Thanksgiving night. I sat there, unsure if my pain was for my parents or for Kaysen himself. My parents, with all their sternness and coldness, had died in blood. But Kaysen, my brother, the light in my darkest childhood days, was now a prisoner, abandoned by the world. I wanted to scream, to demand why, but I just sat there, powerless, watching him being led away, his handcuffs glinting under the courtroom lights. A week later, I went to the Deer Lodge State Prison to see Kaysen one last time. I didn't know what I expected, an explanation, an apology, or just a look from him to know he was still my brother. The prison was cold, the smell of metal and concrete seeping into every breath. I sat behind the thick glass partition, waiting, my heart pounding. When Kaysen walked in, I barely recognized him. He was emaciated, his hair a mess, but there was an eerie calm in his eyes, as if he had accepted his fate. The glass door closed and we faced each other, separated by a pain but worlds apart. I tried to find words, but my throat tightened. "Kaysen," I began, my voice faltering. "Why?" He looked at me, a faint smile flickering on his lips, not one of defiance but of exhaustion. "You wouldn't understand, Jonas," he said slowly, his voice low like a whisper. "Everything they left to you, it's what killed them." His words were a blade, sharp and cold. I wanted to ask more, to understand what he meant, but he just looked at me, his eyes clouded but holding something unspoken. Before he was escorted away, he turned back, giving me one final look. It wasn't the look of a murderer, but of a man who had lost everything: family, freedom, and himself. I stood, gripping the table, wanting to call his name, but he was gone, his figure fading behind the iron door. I left the prison, snow falling again, soft but relentless. I glanced in the rearview mirror, the prison fading into the white haze, but Kaysen's words echoed in my mind like a curse I couldn't shake. I drove aimlessly, unsure where I was going, knowing only that I carried a wound that would never heal. Kaysen, my brother, was now a shadow in my past, and I, though free, was imprisoned by my own pain. I returned to Helena, stepping into the small house that Natalie, Isla, and I once called home. But now, it was silent, like a small tomb in the heart of the city. Natalie and Isla had left, gone to her parents' house to escape the relentless media, the piercing cameras, and probing questions that hounded us. I didn't blame her. I wanted them to be safe, to live in the light, untouched by the darkness of the Hale family. But their absence left the house cold, every corner echoing with Ila's laughter, Natalie's soft singing, and the fleeting moments of peace I once thought would last forever. I lived in seclusion, the doors locked tight, my phone set to silent. The press called incessantly, offering interviews, wanting me to recount the story of the last heir of Hale Holdings. But I refused them all. I didn't want to be part of the spectacle they were crafting, didn't want my family's pain turned into sensational headlines. I limited contact with the outside world, leaving the house only to visit Agnes at the hospital, the one person who had become my only anchor. She was recovering, but each time I looked into her eyes, I saw a profound sadness, as if she too carried wounds that would never heal. My parents' will took effect. The entire estate, the Bridger Ridge mansion, shares in Hale Holdings, bank accounts, was transferred to my name. The immense wealth, power, and reputation my parents had spent their lives building now rested in my hands, but it felt like a burden, an invisible cage. I didn't want to keep it. I sold most of the company's shares, retaining only a small portion to meet the will's condition of maintaining operations. The proceeds I donated to a fund for orphaned children in Montana. I didn't know why I did it, only that it felt like a way to atone. Not for my parents, not for Kaysen, but for myself, the one who had stayed silent as everything began to crumble. 4 months after the massacre, the police released the Bridger Ridge mansion back to me. I stood before the iron gates, staring at the gray stone walls and towering windows, feeling as if I were facing a sleeping beast. I didn't want to return, but I knew I had to. I stepped through the threshold, each step heavy as if carrying the weight of the world. The house had been cleaned, blood, debris, and traces of death gone, but the air was still thick with the scent of cold and memory. I walked through the dining room, the epicenter of that nightmare. The table was now pristine, the cloth new, but I could still see the invisible bloodstains. The toppled chairs etched in my mind. A faint bullet mark on the wall, small but sharp, remained like a scar that would never fade. I entered my father's study, where he once sat with his cold gaze and commanding voice. Everything was unchanged. The oak desk, towering bookshelves, the faint smell of tobacco. On the desk, I found a framed photo face down, its glass cracked in a long, jagged line. I picked it up, wiped away the dust, and my heart clenched. It was a picture of our family when Kaysen and I were young, standing hand in hand on the Bridger Ridge Hill, smiling brightly under the summer sun. The cracked glass blurred my parents' faces, but Kaysen and I remained clear, as if time couldn't touch us. I set the frame back on the desk, saying nothing, only listening to the wind whispering through the window, its silence chilling me. Day after day, I cleaned the mansion, not to erase the past, but to accept it. I left everything as it was, the paintings on the walls, the furniture, even the cracked photo frame. I didn't want to forget, because forgetting would mean denying what happened, denying Kaysen, my parents, and even myself. In the long nights, I sat in my father's study reading his old journals. His words were resolute, brimming with ambition, but between the lines I found voids, moments where he never spoke of love, of family, of the things Kaysen and I had craved. I realized our family didn't collapse because of one horrific night, but because of the distances we never bridged. One morning I stood on the mansion's porch watching snow fall over the garden. The wind was cold, but for the first time in years I felt no fear. I looked at the snowflakes, soft and silent, and a strange calm rose within me. Bridger Ridge, with all its painful memories, was no longer a monster. It was just a house, where I grew up, where I loved, and where I lost everything. I was no longer afraid to face the past because I knew, no matter how painful, it had shaped who I am today. Time passed and I returned to Helena, where snow-covered roads and silent mountains seemed to understand my heart. Our small house was once again filled with Isla's laughter and Natalie's soft humming. They had come back, bringing with them the light I thought I'd lost. Each morning I woke up, brewed coffee in our oak kitchen, listened to Isla talk about her new drawings, and felt the warmth of Natalie's hand gently touching my shoulder. "Are you okay, Jonas?" she'd ask, her eyes tender but perceptive, as if she could see the invisible scars in my soul. I didn't blame them for the months apart. I knew they needed time to heal, to reclaim the peaceful days the Hale family tragedy had stolen. But now, as Isla ran through the yard chasing snowflakes, or when Natalie sat with me late at night, quietly holding my hand, I found joy in those small moments. They were like tiny candles, enough to dispel the darkness left by the past. Though the pain lingered, a quiet pulse in my chest, I learned to live with it, letting it blend with the love and compassion from my wife and daughter. They were my anchor, the reason I kept moving forward despite the lingering chill of Bridger Ridge. I visited Agnes regularly at the nursing home where she was recovering day by day. She was weaker now, her hair silver white, her voice frail, but her eyes still shone with the resilience I'd always admired. I brought her fresh flowers or a plate of the cookies she used to bake for Kaysen and me when we were children. "You're still my boy, Jonas," she'd say, a faint smile on her lips. I held her hand, feeling the fragile warmth of her thin fingers, and realized she was the last family I had, not by blood but by the love she'd given me through all those years. The Bridger Ridge mansion I kept as a memorial. I didn't live there, couldn't live there, but I didn't sell it either. It stood silently on the hill, its gray stone walls and towering windows a testament to the past. I left it there, a reminder that what happened cannot be erased, but it also cannot define me. I began to look back on my family's tragedy, not with resentment or pain, but with newfound understanding. It didn't start with Kaysen's crime, nor with that Thanksgiving night. It began with silences, with the times we didn't speak, didn't listen, didn't understand. My parents, with all their fame and power, built an empire but forgot to build a family. Kaysen, with his rebellion and pain, tried to scream for someone to hear him, but none of us stopped to listen. And I, the silent older brother, let those distances grow until they consumed us all. I realized that fame and wealth couldn't save a family that had lost love. Hale Holdings, with all its grandeur, was just an empty shell, unable to fill the voids in our hearts. I looked at the will, at the money and shares my parents left behind, and saw they meant nothing without someone to share them with. I began to learn forgiveness, not just for Kaysen, who caused the tragedy, not just for my parents, who pushed us into darkness, but for myself, who had stayed silent too long. One day I sat down and started writing, not to justify, not to boast, but to tell our story, mine, Kaysen's, the Hale family's. I wrote about the days on Bridger Ridge, the smiles and tears, the mistakes and the things we never got to fix. I wrote to warn, to urge those chasing fame to pause and look at the loved ones beside them before it's too late. That memoir wasn't an explanation but a reminder that family isn't money or prestige but the moments we share, no matter how small. I began engaging with the community, speaking to at-risk youth, kids teetering on the edge between light and darkness as Kaysen once did. I shared my brother's story not to judge but to show them where that path leads. I looked into their eyes, full of anger, fear, and hope, and saw Kaysen in them. I couldn't save my brother, but I hoped to keep someone else from following his footsteps. The pain never went away. It lingered, a scar on my chest, aching whenever I thought of Kasin, my parents, or what was lost. But I learned to live with it, not letting it consume me. I learned to get up each day, step outside, and find meaning in the small things. Isla's smile, Natalie's advice, Agnes's hand in mine. She once told me in a quiet afternoon at the nursing home, "Every person leaves two legacies, Jonas. One in a safe and one in the hearts of others." I chose the latter. Finally, one early morning, I stood before our small house in Helena, watching snow fall on the roof. The flakes settled gently, blanketing the world as if soothing every wound. I realized happiness doesn't come from being forgiven, but from knowing how to forgive, even those who hurt me most. I forgave Kasin, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go. I forgave my parents because they, though cold, were only human with their own mistakes. And I forgave myself for not being strong enough to stop the tragedy. I stood in the morning light, hands clenched, eyes calm. The cold wind blew, but I didn't shiver. The storm within me had stopped. The cycle of pain finally closed. I knew there would still be difficult days ahead, but I also knew I was ready, not to forget, but to live on with all that the past had taught me. 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 Past had taught me.